Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns, and I know that for some time we have been touting an upcoming blockbuster feature on Louisiana Inspector General Stephen Street. And I'm happy to announce today is the day that has arrived. We're going to give you a major update on our Inspector General Stephen Street. Now, probably about a week or 10 days ago, we gave you a kind of a highlight reel from one of our very first interviews, one of our fascinating interviews with a gentleman named Corey Delahousse. Briefly, Corey came in after Hurricane Gustav. He identified $58 million in FEMA-related fraud, and all of which was denied, and it was appealed up to Washington, and they upheld the denial. And then Corey found himself on the receiving end of an investigation by Inspector General Stephen Street. And I want to break away for just the final 40 or so seconds of that clip. During that hearing referencing Judge Ricks, an attorney for Goshep was placed on the stand. And he was asked. It was a covered agency, and he said, I don't know. And he was also asked if you had submitted billings directly to Goshep, would it have been appropriate for Goshep to pay them? And he said, no, in fact, I think it would have been quite improper. All of which is to lay the foundation for the fact that Livingston Parish is not a covered agency, therefore denying the jurisdiction for Stephen Street to have even been in there in the first place. All right, we're back. I want to emphasize here that at the time we had that interview, he was still under criminal charges. And the judge in that case, State District Judge Brenda Ricks, she made a very important ruling. And we're going to put up on the screen right now the three things that she said in her key ruling. We're going to highlight them. Number one, she said that Stephen Street only had jurisdiction over a covered agency. That's why I was going back to that 45-second clip. That would mean it has to be an agency of the state of Louisiana, and Corey's contract was with Livingston Parish. She therefore ruled that Stephen Street had no jurisdiction whatsoever to have been involved in this particular case. Now that won't be relevant for today's feature, but I wanted to we're just going to break down the three things that she said. Number two, she said that in order to execute a subpoena, you've got to follow the statute that requires a 72-hour waiting period for the application with a judge. Stephen Street readily said, well, yeah, the statute says that, but we've never bothered with doing it. All right, and then critically, number three. This is number three, and it's very important toward today's feature. Judge Ricks ruled that the Inspector General does not have search warrant authority. All right, I want to make that clear. John McClendon, Corey Delahousse's defense attorney, was challenging whether or not the Inspector General even has the authority to go in and procure search warrants and go in and execute searches. And Judge Ricks ruled that that the Inspector General's office does not. Now, I want to transition today because we have a very important court hearing that is coming up on Tuesday, and it's very relevant at this time. To give you a little bit of background, Nate Kane, who is the son of longtime Angola prison warden Burl Kane, has recently been charged with improperly using his credit card, with his state-issued credit card, with regard to his duties as the warden for the Avoyles Parish Correctional Facility. And it was the Inspector General. Now bear in mind that Judge Ricks has made this ruling that you do not have search warrant authority, okay? And sometimes, we're going to give you the link for an Advocate article wherein sometimes I think that perhaps Mr. McClendon should give a volume discount when dealing with issues with Mr. Street, because naturally Nate Kane has gone out and hired John McClendon, the same attorney who argued successfully in front of Judge Ricks that, hey, you don't have search warrant authority. Stephen Street apparently maybe can't comprehend that. Now, he argues that he does, okay? But here's the thing. We're going to give you the article for the Advocate newspaper, about this little difference of opinion about whether or not they do or do not have search warrant authority. That's what the court hearing is going to be. But I want to emphasize one thing in that Advocate article, and this is huge. This is a quote, and boy, I blew it up. This is a quote from Greg Ferries, who was the lead investigator of the Inspector General's office at the time. And I've put this sucker right in front of the camera, okay? I'm putting it there and I've got a highlighted section. I want to leave it there for a few seconds, let it soak in. Because here's what it says. The law is not clear. The law is not clear. All right? The statute is contradictory. Okay? The law is not clear, and the statute is contradictory. Now, I want to break away once again for just a few moments, and I want you to go see Corey explaining exactly how the raid went down the early morning of July 25th. I believe it was 2013. He'll have the date firmly committed to memory, but if I may remember right, it was July 25th, 2013. Let's break away and hear Corey explain exactly how this search warrant raid by the Inspector General's office went down. We'll be right back.
So on July 25th, 2013, the Sheriff's Department shows up with a SWAT team knocking on my door. We're laying in bed at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I walk outside, guns drawn on me, as if I was some kind of drug lord. They raid my house, have my kids, pull my kids out of bed, which are sleeping. My daughter was 10 years old, my son was 7. They were scared, my wife was in her nightgown.
Sure.
This was one of those moments where you think, this could not be happening to me.
I understand.
And Greg Ferries walks up in his starched cowboy blue jeans and his cowboy boots and tells me, like he's John Wayne, that we could do this the easy way or the hard way.
All right, folks, you heard him. Corey said that Greg Ferries came in when he went to execute the search warrant and them take 42 computers and 19 terabytes of information, only to have a judge later said you had no jurisdiction whatsoever to even be over here. He was pretty bold, wasn't he? We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Wow, that's pretty authoritative, given that he would subsequently, by his own admission, say, the law is not clear about whether or not I even had the right to be over there. Now, let me explain to you why that particular quote by Mr. Ferries is so critical. One of the things that John McClendon argued in the Corey Delahousse case was something called the rule of lenity. I'm going to put that in front of the camera as well, all right? And it is a doctrine. Let me just put it in front of you. I blew the letters up really big. All right, I'm going to just take a few seconds for you to take a look at it. And what it says is that's a judicial doctrine requiring that all ambiguities in a criminal statute be resolved in favor of the defendant. Wow. In favor of the defendant if it is not contrary to legislative intent. Well, this sure looks like ambiguity to me. The law is not clear, and this is your lead investigator. The law is not clear, and then we have the rule of lenity that says that if something is ambiguous, it has to be what? Resolved in favor of the defendant. Now, I don't know about John McClendon, but I would be salivating about referencing this quote in the arguments in this court case that's coming up, and then arguing the rule of lenity, all right? Now, we're going to provide you with links for the legal filings, both for Mr. Kane as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office in opposition. I'm going to quickly summarize, and I mean very briefly. Basically, the separation in their arguments is Mr. McClendon is saying if the legislature intended for the Inspector General's office to have search warrant authority, they would have so specified. And he says they went to excruciating lengths to say if you want to go get a subpoena, you've got to have a 72-hour wait period. Remember, we just referenced that. Mr. McClendon is arguing the legislature is trying to keep the Inspector General's office from being a loose cannon out there and out of control. And he says they could have given them unfettered access, ability to do these things like they do the Attorney General's office, but they put constraints on for a reason. The U.S. Attorney, on the other hand, says, oh no, they have very broad powers unless they are specifically restricted by the statute. And they reference that the Inspector General's office cannot go out there and make arrest. So the U.S. Attorney is arguing that the Inspector General does have search warrant authority, even though it's not explicitly spelled out in the statute, and that the intent of the legislature was to grant them search warrant authority. Now, there's one other aspect that Mr. McClendon is arguing, and he says that by Louisiana statute, you cannot execute a search warrant unless you have a peace officer on staff, and he says the Inspector General's office does not have a peace officer on staff. The U.S. Attorney has countered that in saying that the particular investigator who served the search warrant has been awarded a certificate from Louisiana State Police about having completed I don't know how many hour course. You've got it. You can go in there and see her certification. I'm going to tell you, that certainly doesn't give me a real warm and fuzzy feeling coming from Louisiana State Police. I mean, with all of the problematic situations that you've seen with state police over the last several years, I'm going to be blunt about it. I'm not so sure they wouldn't just spit something out on a sheet of paper if she didn't spend 5 seconds. Okay, I'm just being blunt about it. That wouldn't carry a lot of weight with me. We'll have to see if it does with the judge. But those are the core arguments that have been made in this upcoming hearing. We're obviously going to have to wait to see the results. I am going to go ahead and make the prediction based on what I have said here. Mr. Ferry's clear quote, combined with the doctrine of lenity, I believe that Nate Cain is going to walk. Okay, we'll see if I'm right, but I believe that Nate Cain is going to walk in this situation. And if that happens, where is the blame squarely? Because that would be very unfortunate, in my opinion, because I believe this kind of abuse needs to be successfully prosecuted, okay? But wherein lies the blame? Remember, this is not Stephen Street's first rodeo with this. It would seem like, especially given that the Louisiana legislature had a statute that said, Mr. Street, you are to take a back seat. Okay, you are not to be the primary one out there conducting any investigation. Your role is to assist, okay? I can tell you, when I was an FDIC fraud examiner, we served as a backup capacity. We certainly assisted the FBI, but they'd have laughed us out of court if we'd had gone in there and actually tried to serve a search warrant. Okay, now we weren't a law enforcement agency, obviously, but I'm making the point. The statute, the legislature says you are to be a backseat driver here. You are not to be in front of the steering wheel, okay? I don't know why Stephen Street can't seem to grasp that. So if Nate Cain walks, it will be due to Stephen Street's sheer incompetence, his stubbornness, and his inability to read and comprehend filings that have made by John McClendon, the same attorney who already presented all of this. He's hard-headed, folks. So if Nate Cain walks, and I am predicting that he will, you can lay the blame for every bit of it at the feet of Louisiana Inspector General Stephen Street. And I want to say two last things. Wouldn't it have been fairly easy to go ahead and say, you know what, want to err on the side of caution? Why even have this question mark, Mr. Street? Why should this even be an issue? Why should there have to be these arguments even being made? All you had to do is go out and get a genuine law enforcement agency to take on the lead and have them serve the search warrants. Oh, that may interfere with your power trip of how much power you've got. Secondly, I want to say, I would find it a very scary thing, given what all I've seen with the Inspector General's office, if the argument is bought that the legislature intended to give them these broad powers, then the legislature, I will be furious at the legislator's intent, because this operation is a loose cannon and it has no business having search warrant authority. Now we'll have to wait and see how the judge rules, but as I said, I'm going to predict Nate Cain is going to walk. Now, on a previous video feature of Stephen Street, I mentioned that the normal career path for a successful defense attorney will be to kind of cut their teeth, if you will, in a law enforcement capacity, say the district attorney's office or the attorney general's office, and they'll become very good in the prosecutorial role. In fact, they will become so good that they decide, hey, there's far more money in this for me to switch sides and go over and be a defense attorney. And there are a number of outstanding defense attorneys who have followed that career path. Mr. Street, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. He was out in private practice. In fact, in the mid-90s, he was in private practice. He even defended a gentleman named Carl Cleveland, who was also part of that Larry Bankston episode toward the mid-90s. He was unsuccessful in those efforts, and Mr. Cleveland ended up getting a pretty substantial prison time. So I'm here to tell you that Stephen Street was failing miserably as a defense attorney. Now you might say, well, can you offer any evidence of that? And that went to the headline feature that we had today. We're going to, and we've blown it up big for you. I'll put it here in front of the camera. This is the mid-90s. This is that time frame when Stephen Street was serving as a defense attorney. And this is a federal tax lien, all right? And you can look and you can see on here. Hopefully I have it to where you can read the entire thing, but we've blown up the picture anyway. In the 3 years that this tax lien covers, in 1994, Mr. Street had trouble paying $4,500 in income taxes. This is a 1040 IRS tax lien. In 1995, he was unable to pay $7,300 in federal taxes. And in 1996, he was unable to pay $1,000 in federal taxes. And so consequently, on March the 26th of 1998, they resorted to filing this federal tax lien. All right? And I want to emphasize something to you. The IRS does not just fall out of bed and say, you know what, he paid his taxes, we're going to go file a lien. It doesn't work that way. They go through extensive collection efforts, and anyone who's been on the receiving end of that, and I will tell you right now, I have not, thank God. I always pay my taxes very promptly, unlike our illustrious Attorney General. But they work extensively to try to get this collected before they resort to filing a lien, and yet you see Mr. Street, and that provides the evidence of the floundering nature of his private practice in not filing these in not paying his taxes, and then as a result having this lien filed against him. Now, I will say that he did cure the federal tax lien about 6 months later in September of 1998. But let me just say one other thing. When I was an FDIC fraud examiner, look, I'm going to tell you something. You could not have a charged off loan and work for that organization. Okay, you flat could not do it. All right? This, as far as I'm concerned, is far worse than a charged off loan. Now, why do I say that? Well, because a charged off loan, it will affect the profitability of the shareholders who own that particular bank. But unless the bank goes under as a result of an awful lot of bad loans, it doesn't affect you or I. Not paying your taxes affects all of us, okay? And it ought to be a high priority. But apparently with Mr. Street, it was not. And I'm going to tell you something. The mere existence of this should have disqualified him under the Jindal administration from even taking on the Inspector General role. And it most certainly, it would be that he should never even have been considered for the U.S. Attorney's Office, okay? And yet I have it on very good sources that he was being extensively lobbied to get that position, and I trust my sources. But I think all it takes is a small background check and you will see he should not even be considered for that position. All right. Well, was that the end of the story? I'm here to tell you it most certainly was not, okay? Like I said, he did cure the tax lien. But next, we have an this is still a private practice attorney. We're going to blow this one up for you too. This is the East Baton Rouge occupational licensing tax lien, okay? All right, this is a lousy $500. I told you Mr. Street was struggling. I think this is evidence right here, okay? $500. Now bear in mind, this man is a CPA, so it's not like he's ignorant of the fact that he's supposed to pay his occupational licensing tax. You know, and so this is the gentleman that we have put in place of going out and trying to assure that state employees adhere to their duties, and this man can't even see fit to pay his own occupational licensing tax, okay? Now that tax, that lien, this is a lien for non-payment of it, okay? And it was recorded in the year 2001, all right? And I'm here to tell you, Mr. Street let a lousy $500 lien linger around for 4 years, okay? And why did he even, there's no evidence that he would have paid it in the year 2005 when he did pay it. But guess what? Mr. Street went to sell his previous residence and buy a new residence in the year 2005. And we're going to break away right now and let you learn a little bit more about Stephen Street's finances concerning his primary residence. We'll be right back. Okay, let's talk about Stephen Street's home's purchase. We're placing a photo of his home up on the screen for you to see, and we'll be adding numbers as we go along. As I said, the only reason he paid off his occupational licensing tax lien is because he had to in order to clear out any encumbrances either to the sale of his former home or the purchase of his new home. So after he allowed a lousy $500 tax lien to go unpaid to the city of Baton Rouge, for 4 years, the lien was filed on November the 14th, 2001 and wasn't released until September 16th, 2005. He finally paid it so he could purchase his new home. So, Mr. Street lives at 14523 Majestic Oak Place North, which is located in Live Oaks Estate in Baton Rouge. For those of you familiar with Baton Rouge, the subdivision is located off Highland Road, not too far past Highland Park after you have made a left onto Highland if you're taking the Segan exit off the interstate. Now, Mr. Street sold his former residence for $216,000, and he paid $285,000 for his current house that you see pictured on your screen. He initially took out a first mortgage for $228,000, which, as a CPA, he was no doubt being prudent to, number one, have equity already in his home, and number two, avoid the need to make PMI payments. Now, he made that purchase toward the end of 2005. Well, in early 2008, we all know Governor Jindal named Stephen Street as the Inspector General. What did Mr. Street do? He immediately took out 2 home equity lines of credit, basically second mortgages, in the amounts of $50,000 and $28,420 on the home. So doing the math, once Governor Jindal blessed Street with his new position, he went from owing approximately $226,000 on his home to owing just over $300,000. Now, Mr. Street has done quite well with the exorbitant salary Governor Jindal and Governor Edwards has agreed to pay him. So on April 3rd, 2013, he refinanced the home you see pictured, and he paid off the two home equity lines of credit and consolidated everything into one first mortgage in the amount of $281,200. Now, it's a 30-year mortgage, so assuming an interest rate of 3.75%, what we find is that of the $285,000 purchase price Mr. Street paid for the home, he continues to owe approximately $253,000, or 89% of its original purchase price, even though he bought it 13 years ago. He also owes 11% more than on the day he bought the home. I would suggest to you that these home equity lines of credit are indicative of someone wanting to live above his income level, elevated as it may be by his appointment to the Inspector General's office, and is not representative of someone who has the ability to declare the independence from the governor that he wants to declare. The bottom line is he is totally beholden to the governor, and yet, let's just watch how he portrays his independence from the governor when I have confronted him on that issue at the Baton Rouge Press Club. Let's break away.
In 2010, the New Jersey Inspector General was eliminated. In early 2013, or sometime in 2013, you have the Fort Lee Bridge lane closure scandal. Now, you have to ask yourself this question: had that office not been eliminated, at the very least, you can say that the taxpayers in New Jersey would have saved themselves quite a bit of money and would have had an independent investigator able to look at this matter instead. Yes, sir.
Well, my question was for Inspector General Street. With regard to the Christie incident and your prior colleague, obviously if the agency had hung around, she would have been directly in the crosshairs of the governor. Can you cite us a single specific example that we can go and verify where you found yourself in the crosshairs of the governor, of a sitting governor?
And that's Robert Burns, ladies and gentlemen, Exhibit A, what I'm talking about with regard to folks being upset with the IG because of our investigative activities. But if you can't find two better examples of my budget being zeroed out by the Louisiana legislature, I can't do anything. So I really have nothing else to say about that.
We're doing everything we can, sir. You need to tell the legislature not to keep reducing on staff. So, yes,
so every time
excuse me, Robert, would you mind trying to have a discussion?
Every other person has been willing to be videotaped, Mr. Street.
Okay. We're working as fast as we can. I think I'm getting ready to be the new secretary. All right.
I'll check in next
Just give me a
month.
call.
Yeah, I mean, as always.
Can I ask, out of the 36 AGs across the state, can you tell me how many have an organization chart that report to the governor? And that should be irrelevant.
Most of them do report to the governor.
Most of them do. Have you ever?
Most of them do, but most of them also have the ability. Some of them are removable at will. Others cannot be fired by the governor, like me.
But you're saying the majority do report to the governor?
I don't know about the majority.
Have you ever made any effort to branch out and not have your organization be totally independent like the legislative auditor's
Our
office is?
organization is independent, sir.
All right, folks, I really don't feel compelled to add a whole lot to those video clips you just saw. I think they pretty well speak for themselves. But I will point out one thing. You just heard Stephen Street say that he could not be fired by the governor. That is flat out wrong, okay? And we're going to give you the statute. I'll give you a direct link to the statute. All that is required is for the governor to decide he wants to terminate Mr. Street, and then he just gets a majority of the House and the Senate to go along, and Street is out the door, okay? So I would have to question his ability to read the statute that governs his own employment, apparently similar to the way he may not be able to read Mr. McClendon's excellent legal research with regard to the search warrant authority that he may or may not have, and certainly the doctrine of lenity that I think is probably going to cause him a problem in this upcoming federal hearing. But let me just say this. Stephen Street is nothing more than a puppet for the governor. That's all there is to it. When Bobby Jindal filled many of these positions, he searched out for folks that he knew he could hold something over their head and that he could, exert leverage over to get them to do exactly what he told them to do. Mike Edmondson is a perfect example, okay? Mike Edmondson had a horrendous driving record. I mean, he would... Look, I don't have to say anymore. Everybody has seen Mike Edmondson enough. Stephen Street is cut from the same cloth. I've just told you there's no way this man could go back into private practice and survive. It would never happen, okay? You see how he floundered before. It's only us taxpayers that are able to bail him out, okay? And I'm going to let you know something else. I can practically guarantee you, hear what I'm saying, I can guarantee you that Stephen Street would not be a fan of the Louisiana Checkbook Initiative that is currently being touted, and there's legislation sponsored by Taylor Barra, the Speaker of the House, to provide us with that Louisiana checkbook. Why? Stephen Street doesn't want you seeing all of the extravagant travel expenses he's incurred as he goes around with this Association of Inspector Generals in his third year as president, and he wants all of them to bow down and worship him, and we would easily be able to see just how much he's spending on all this, on basically having his posterior kissed from all these folk, okay? And also, even more critically, we would get a very good view into the enormous amount of legal expenses that we as taxpayers are having to pay whenever he gets sued for screw-ups such as what happened with Corey Delahousse. You know, there's no question. He had no authority. He had no jurisdiction whatsoever to be in Corey Delahouse's home. It is unquestioned. And yet, here he goes in there with a 6 a.m. raid. You just heard Corey say earlier, we drag ferries, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And now ferries are saying, I don't even know if we had the right to have the search warrant in the first place. Wow. And speaking of Corey Delahoussaye, let me bring you up to speed on the latest on that particular trial. Late last year, Stephen Street filed a protective order to keep the public from being able to see an itemization of about 15 items that he says, the public can't see this, you know. And I'm going to hold up because I want to highlight number 8. All right, we're going to give you the entire document, but I'm putting this right in front of the camera. This is number 8, okay? And I deem it as, they're all of significance, and I've highlighted a few, but number 8 is really significant. Okay, what does number 8 say? He doesn't want the public being able to see communications between the OIG and FBI agent Stephen Soley and related documents and things. Well, this whole investigation has long since ago been concluded, all right? So what are you afraid of, Mr. Street? Well, let me just enlighten you a little bit, all right? As a former fraud investigator myself, I can tell you what he's afraid of, okay? It's completely illogical to believe that the FBI, who was utilizing Corey Delahoussaye as a confirmed informant, would turn around and be a part of prosecuting him, all right? Just doesn't work that way, and Stephen Street knows it. And I promise you, you can take it to the bank. I don't need to see the documents, Mr. Street. I got enough common sense to know what it is you don't want people seeing. You can bet there's email or other correspondence from this FBI agent that says we have no interest in pursuing Corey Delahoussaye. We don't believe there's a case. And Stephen Street went forward anyway. And why'd he do that? Because he was a lapdog of Governor Jindal, the same way he is a lapdog for John Bell Edwards, the current governor. And that's going to take me to one thing. When Governor Edwards was at the Baton Rouge Press Club on January the 8th, I had all kinds of people wanting me to ask him this, ask him that, ask him this. I got bombarded with things. The state troopers wanted this. I'm not going to go into everybody who wanted something, okay? As I said in a previous video, I knew that it would be an infringement on me to ask any more than one question, and I felt privileged to be able to get to ask one question. And I'm going to tell you one thing. The question I wanted to ask, and I asked it, is whether or not Governor Edwards would stand by this Inspector General Street, who, eliminating his office, defunding it, would save us about $2 million in direct costs, not to mention the outrageous legal expenses that we're paying. Let's break away and let's hear me pose the question of Governor Edwards, and let's hear his response.
Yes, sir.
Governor, given the civil lawsuits that have been filed against the Office of Inspector General from cases like Murphy Painter, Corey Delahoussaye, how much confidence do you have in Stephen Street, and has your administration ever considered defunding that office to save approximately $3 million a year?
I have confidence in Stephen Street. We've considered defunding everything because of the cliff. So, but not because that's something that we think would be a good thing to do, and it's not something that we will propose in our executive budget proposal.
All right, folks, you heard him make it very clear, okay? Governor Edwards is standing by Stephen Street. And I'm just going to tell you, Governor, and I hope you're looking at this video. I've had people, I mean highly credible people, who have contacted me who have basically said Stephen Street has run interference for investigations that should have gone on forward. They ran interference. You know that of which I speak, Governor Edwards. So it's going to be interesting. Things may get really interesting over the course of the next year. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is to House Appropriations Committee Chairman Cameron Henry. Governor Edwards has laid down the challenge to you, Representative Henry, or Chairman Henry. He says, come up with cuts. Well, I can tell you one area that really ought to be a high priority cut area, and that is defunding Stephen Street's office. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that Were I in a legislator's position, and sometimes I kind of wish I was, but there's no way you're ever going to get me there. There is no way in hell I'm voting for one dime in additional taxes until this man's office is totally defunded. We are paying through the nose just to fund his office so that he can run around to these conventions and talk about how great he is. And we're paying extravagant legal expenses to defend him in matters like Corey De La Houssaye, and we don't even get to see how much these legal expenses are, and trust me, they're staggering. That's going to wrap up this video. You can obviously look to your newspaper to see how the hearing goes on the Nate Cain situation, because I can assure you it will be covered. And even if it does turn out that the judge buys into the U.S. Attorney's Office, look at the expense that has been needlessly had to take place, as a result of Stephen Street just not wanting to be wear belt and suspenders. He could have easily avoided all this. And we don't even want to talk about what's going to happen if Nate Cain walks, because Stephen Street, I don't even know what the word is. Is it that he's that incompetent? Is it that he can't read? Is it that he's got too big of an ego to admit he's supposed to take a back seat? I don't know what it is. But I'm still going to lay money that Nate Cain walks. This is Robert Burns. Thank you so much for taking the time to see this video. Thank you again.